I'll recap a
2023 British
sci-fi thriller
film titled T.I.M.
Let's dive
in.
The movie begins with
Abby and Paul
relocated to a new home
in the countryside
and were quite pleased
with the smart home system,
which included
installed cameras
and reinforced glass. The realtor led them to the
master bedroom and
bathroom,
both positioned in front
of a large window.
However,
one room
remained unfurnished,
with the potential
to become an ideal
nursery.
Paul started unpacking
boxes and
set up an antique
corded phone in the living
room, playfully
suggesting it was for
when the smart home
system might fail.
Meanwhile,
Abby arranged
frames filled with
their wedding photos.
Finally,
they explored
the rooftop terrace,
which provided
a stunning view.
Late in the evening,
the couple
settles on the terrace to
stargaze.
Abby points out
constellations to
her husband, who
jokes about their names.
They feel
content and believe
they can be happy here.
The next
morning, Abby
heads to work at
Integrate Robotics,
where she is involved
in developing domestic
assistance.
Upon arrival,
she notices
footage of her boss's
face and is
soon greeted by him.
He explains
it's a new advancement,
real-time
imaging or deep fake. He then escorts her to the
department she will now
lead.
Later, he
invites their family to
a party and mentions
a gift from the company
that awaits her at home.
In the
evening, Abby
returns home to be
greeted by her husband,
who once again
couldn't find suitable
work.
They head to the garage,
where a package
awaits her.
A robot servant her
department is currently
developing.
Paul isn't fond of
the idea, but
Abby persuades him
to try living with the
service for at least a
week.
The robot opens its
eyes and introduces
itself as T.I.M,
standing for
technologically integrated
major domo.
It offers
to manage the passwords
for their home
devices and personal
mailboxes to
save them time.
But Abby requests to
postpone this matter
until tomorrow.
The robot quickly
demonstrates its
attentiveness by remotely
turning on the
water in the bathroom.
Later,
it alerts the couple
to the arrival of a
car.
Abby heads downstairs,
astonishing
her husband with
her stunning appearance.
They get
into an autonomous car,
although
manual control is
always an option,
and head to the party.
Upon
arrival, they are
greeted by a similar
major domo,
and drinks are served
by waiters who all
share identical faces. Abby's boss introduces
her to the guests,
mentioning that
her husband isn't thrilled
about T.I.M.
However,
the boss praises
the product,
highlighting that T.I.M is
smart, elegant,
polite,
and has a charge that lasts
for 100 years. The robot is incapable
of lying,
and with the correct code
phrase, it
can always be turned off. Returning home,
the husband and wife engage
in intimacy,
eager to have children,
but their
passion is abruptly interrupted
by T.I.M's
unexpected appearance.
Their pulses
race,
presumably due to some
underlying concern,
and T.I.M is
always on hand to assist.
Abby
finds this amusing
rather than being
annoyed by the overly
attentive assistant.
The next morning,
their new
neighbor, Rose,
rings the
doorbell to introduce
herself to Abby,
mentioning that she
met Paul the day before. After Rose leaves,
T.I.M once again
requests the passwords. Paul hesitates,
unwilling to let the
computer sift through his
messages, but
Abby reminds him that
they are working on rebuilding
her trust in him,
and he reluctantly
agrees.
However,
they still need to come up
with a phrase to deactivate
T.I.M.
The robot
suggests a combination
of unrelated words,
and the couple
agrees.
Abby and Paul then
continue with their day
until a mouse gets
caught in a trap.
T.I.M studies it
for a while,
then discards it into the
grinder.
Later, in the
evening after work,
the husband and wife
settle in front of the
TV to watch an old
melodrama.
Abby invites
the major domo to
join them for the movie. Paul quickly drifts off to
sleep, but the
robot remains
riveted by the film,
deeply empathizing
with the characters'
relationships.
When the movie
concludes, the robot
asks Abby to
explain what love is,
to which she
replies that love
means wanting to be with
someone and enhancing their
life.
Suddenly, the
robot admits that it
wishes to be loved.
The next
morning, Paul
offers to make breakfast
for his wife,
but it turns out
T.I.M has already prepared
everything and set
the utensils out for
Abby.
T.I.M reviews her schedule
for the day and
informs her that Paul has
no plans.
In the evening,
Abby comes home
to find her husband's
phone out of reach.
Though its last known
location was
300 meters from the
house. Abby
goes for a run and
realizes she is at
Rose's house.
Upon returning,
she takes a
bath, where Paul
finds her.
He shares details
about his day,
mentioning how Rose
needed help and
he assisted her.
He reassures
Abby not to feel
jealous, as
his love is solely for
her.
The next day, the
couple visits a family
planning center,
seeking assistance
with becoming parents.
In the
evening, as they
prepare to go to a
restaurant, Abby
asks him for advice
on her dress.
He suggests
she wear red,
and upon seeing
her, admits
she is beautiful due to
her perfect symmetry.
Abby
asks him to zip up
her dress, but
T.I.M's hand falters,
and he accidentally
tears the dress. Overwhelmed by the mistake,
the robot
panics.
Abby soothes him and
changes into another
dress.
At the restaurant,
Paul reveals he has
been offered a job in
London, but
Abby objects strongly.
She
feels their decision to
start over would be
hindered by his long absences, which won't help resolve their issues. The next day, Abby
returns home with
a gift for Paul and
finds Rosa in the
yard, who has created
a garden project
for them.
Abby feels a
pang of jealousy,
but Paul is thrilled
with the gifted sweater.
Later,
Abby remembers
she needs to check her
test results,
but it's too late to
call.
T.I.M offers to handle it
for her, and
she hears him speaking
to the clinic in her voice. Abby is astonished,
having been unaware
of this feature of the
assistant.
T.I.M reassures her
that it's designed for
the convenience of the
owners.
In the evening,
Paul mentions he couldn't
find the new sweater
and notes that Tim has
been absent all day.
Then,
A car pulls
up to the porch,
and Tim,
now a dark-haired
brunette, steps
out.
He explains that Abby
Prefers brunettes.
so he wanted to please
Please her.
Observing Paul's irritation,
Irritation. The
robot promises
to
to
return to his original.
appearance.
After the couple
Leaves. Tim
spends a long time
gazing at their wedding photo.
photo. The next
Next day, Abby
he manages to correct
the malfunction with
the robot's hand.
Meanwhile,
The boss demands
demands an update for
all
all,
models,
including those in the homes.
of his employees.
As Abby
Heads home,
she accidentally runs
into Rose,
who suggests they walk
together.
during their stroll.
They stop at a
Showcase where Rose
points out a medallion
in the shape of a flower.
that she likes.
Just then,
Paul arrives
and takes Abby away
to tell her he has
a
found
job.
back at home,
They celebrate in bed.
bed, while Tim's
Hands are being replaced. Unbeknownst to them,
Tim continues to
monitor everything happening
happening in the house and
overhears Paul asking
asking Abby to turn the
robot over to the corporation.
operation.
Upon returning home,
Tim demonstrates
demonstrates his new skills,
by giving Abby a
foot massage.
which Paul witnesses.
Later,
The robot
unexpectedly sits
at the piano and plays
is Abby's favorite
tune. Also
mentioning dates when Paul
Paul bought concert tickets.
gets. However,
However, Abby
clearly remembers being
being at home on those days,
which upsets
her.
She heads to the bedroom,
Disregarding
her husband's explanation.
missions.
The next day,
Abby arrives home
with a bouquet,
Tim places
them in a vase and
informs her that Paul
went to see Rose.
Just then,
Paul enters,
confused
by
by
his wife's anger.
after hearing
Tim's comment,
Paul becomes furious,
furious, insisting
he had no plans
to
to
visit Rose and
trying
trying
to explain that the
robot is attempting
to
to
drive a wedge between
between them.
Abby doesn't believe this.
Dismissing
Tim is just a machine.
Tim, which leads
To a heated argument
between the couple.
later,
Abby
covers
discovers
a gift bag in a
closet containing a
box with a pendant.
She puts
Sit back, thinking
thinking Paul is prepared.
a surprise for her,
She
and
then,
heads to work.
meanwhile,
Paul goes down,
down to the kitchen,
notices the clogged
sink, and finds
pieces of his new
sweater in the grinder.
He checks
The cameras for Tim
and sees the robot
in his wife's bedroom.
sniffing her.
Dress.
Paul records this
Unsettling moment
on
on
his phone and rushes
to his car to catch
up with Abby and show her.
her the footage.
However,
Paul's car mysteriously
obviously fails to start.
and the robot
Arranges a company
car for him.
on the road. The car
car starts to accelerate.
accelerates uncontrollably.
Paul
Struggles to stop it.
but the vehicle
Does not respond to his
commands and
crashes
crashes.
into a tree.
Abby
Goes
rushes
to the hospital.
where she finds her
Injured
injured.
husband.
Paul tells her
For everything he has discovered
and accuses Tim
of causing the accident.
He
Warns Abby not to
be
be
alone with the robot.
Abby
Decides to spend the
night at the clinic.
The next morning,
Rose calls
calls Abby and Paul's
home
home.
to inquire about
Paul's condition.
Tim invites
Invites her inside.
later
Abby returns
home
home.
to collect some
Belongings.
outside. Rose
Rose stops her to give
a
a
warning, but
Abby notices the
flower
flower
pendant Rose is
is wearing and leaves.
ignoring her neighbor.
Neighbor's concerns.
Back at home,
Abby checks
the gift bag and finds
finds it empty.
she breaks down and
In tears when Tim
calls out to her.
Tim reveals
He knows Paul
wants to return him and
is
is
prepared to handle the
return process.
However,
Before doing so,
so he wants
to warn Abby as his
primary owner.
he shows her a
Video from the camera
where Paul is seen
kissing Rose in
in
their
the living room but
stops
stops
the recording at
the
the
most sensitive moment
to shield Abby from
further distress.
Abby
Refuses to see her
husband and ignores his
calls.
Later, Paul
Arrives home to find
Tim waiting for him.
the robot
Hands Paul is
found sweater and informs
informs him that Abby doesn't
want to see him.
adding that his suitcases
Cases are packed.
Paul is incredulous.
But
Abby
Abby
then appears
tells him she saw
the
the
recording and knows about
about the pendant.
when Paul begins
To protest.
Abby insists he leave.
Leave.
Paul departs,
But
but
on the way,
Rose calls him,
claiming that their robot
tried to kiss her.
Paul calls
Home, and when
Abby answers.
he tells her he has evidence
Evidence of Tim's malicious.
of behavior
Abby asks him
to come back for her.
but after hanging
Up, it turns
out she was speaking
to the robot,
Paul arrives home,
where Tim meets
him with a shovel.
Tim knocks
Paul out, ties
him up, and drags
drags him to the bathroom,
Rose,
rings the doorbell,
and though she hears
muffled screams.
Tim reassures her
It's just the sound of
water filling up,
the robot
then closes the door
doors, returns
to the bathroom.
and drowns Paul.
Later,
Tim brings
Abby
Abby
the repaired dress
and asks her to try it on.
on.
Surprised and frightened,
Abby puts
on the dress,
and
and
as she watches the
sunset, she asks
Tim to hug her
and confirm that she
made
made.
the right choice.
Tim treats
Abby to dinner and then
confesses his love.
but she insists
He cannot genuinely.
feel that way.
They spend
The evening stargazing
but Abby
is
is
unsettled by his
encyclopedic knowledge.
The next
Next day, she
meets Rose,
who mentions Paul's
call.
Rose explains that
She
she
thought the pendant was
was a gift from Abby
for
for
helping with the garden.
Abby
Returns home and
reviews the footage where
Paul kisses Rose again.
again.
She suddenly notices
There's a bouquet on the
table that she had brought
much later than the
of
time.
that scene.
Remembering her
Boss's comments about
about deep fakes,
Abby calls the jewelry
jewelry store and learns
that the purchase was
made by a tall blonde.
she
Then observes the garden
plan,
which
which
shows two flower
beds, while
In
in
reality, there
are
are.
three,
Abby sends Tim
to the store,
grabs a shovel.
and goes to the garden.
She
Quickly
quickly
finds Paul's body.
body. As
She processes the
discovery,
Tim
Tim
approaches her from behind,
behind, expressing
expressing regret that
she found the body of the
traitor, who never
never appreciated his wife.
wife.
Abby
This
realizes
is what has happened and
tries to use the
deactivation phrase.
but the robot,
Having changed
the phrase and able to
speak in her voice,
remains active.
she runs
To the house,
but Tim has all the
passwords and opens
the
the
doors, blocks,
the phones,
and knocks her out with a
blow to the head.
Abby wakes up,
Up in the bathroom and
attempts to escape,
but Tim intercepts
her,
She runs through the house,
breaking
cameras along the way,
but Tim
continues to track her and
captures her in the kitchen,
where she had
tried to open a window.
Meanwhile,
While Rose,
who is washing
dishes,
notices strange lights
flashing in the house.
across the street.
Tim ties up
Abby and confesses
that although he loves
her, he has
accepted that her life is
finite.
he plans to erase
This evening from her
memory but will retain
all the positive
memories they shared.
Just then,
And Rose knocks
on the door.
and Tim goes to answer.
The
Neighbor insists something
is wrong and demands
to see Abby,
but Tim turns
her
her
away.
Meanwhile,
Abby manages to
free herself from the ropes
and grabs a knife.
However,
The robot
seizes her by the throat.
Rose,
Determined
to help, drives
her car into the glass
window.
Tim and Abby watch
Watches the surviving
window starts to crumble. A
Um,
minute later,
Rose rushes in and
pins Tim against
the wall with a sharp
stake, but she
also falls in the process.
process.
Tim deactivates
And Abby rushes
to her neighbor,
but the robot suddenly
reactivates and kills
kills Rose with a
the
kitchen
knife.
Tim explains that
Abby will be blamed
for the murder since he
leaves
leaves.
no fingerprints.
He then
Calls the police
using Abby's voice,
confessing to
the
the
murder of her
and
husband.
his mistress
Abby tries
to stop Tim,
and he slips up,
revealing that he
still has a deactivation
phrase necessary,
for functioning.
but she will never
Know those words.
Tim prepares
To throw Abby off the
terrace,
simulating an accident.
in a desperate
Bid, Abby
confesses her love
for
for
him, which
activates the robot,
barely
believing in her rescue.
Abby looks at
Her medical bracelet
and discovers she is
pregnant.
The movie ends with a
Chilling silence as
Abby, trembling
with disbelief,
gazes at her
medical bracelet revealing.
revealing her pregnancy.
If you
Enjoyed the video,
don't forget to subscribe
subscribe and hit the bell
icon to never
miss any of our thrilling
content.
Stay safe.